So today we have, it's the last one of landscape integrity. So here the most important thing that really is what this dimension is all about is exploring how we understand land as land itself. And understanding in this session, so it's the second one, really getting into the frameworks. So there are a lot of different frameworks that can help us understand and conceptualize the complexity of the relationship that we have as land or with land, depending on where we're seeing it from or from within. So today we wanted to continue on with relationship with land, starting with the story of place. And we'll go into breakout rooms with two people, so in pairs, and give you guys about 15 minutes to go through the questions that you were answering over the weekend or over the week. And then we'll go into a bit of a debrief, questions and answers, if some things that were interesting emerged. As I mentioned, I think briefly last week, it's actually a process that is delightful to do in collective. We've done it with upwards of maybe not as many as 100, but for sure a couple groups of 80, and it's quite magical actually to really see how collective identity can emerge through that. Then we'll go into cosmovisions, Indigenous cosmovisions, but much deeper. So last week was a bit of a taste of it, and this time it's going to be a little bit more storytelling. And then we're going to do a breakout room to really get into what these kind of more ancestral systemic frameworks mean to us. And then we'll go into where they ended up, what they ended up inspiring. So Maslow, Graves. And so Oscar will give a bit of an anecdote of the Siska Nation, also known as the Blackfoot, but in the traditional language is Siska. And then we'll go into the resilience cycle, also as a framework, a systemic framework for understanding landscape integrity, and do a breakout room on that, and then introduce the homework. So, and we've done this homework piece a few times, and people really quite enjoy it. So we hope you do too. Any questions? So there's a chat, just a second. Okay. All right. So so maybe we'll just go quickly over the questions of the project or the story of place that you were working on. So initially it began with the story of place. So just a second. Displaced. So first you were answering these questions of origin. So how did this place start? What are its origins? Where was it born? And then you walk into the next one. If you're doing this in a group with a community or with your own organization or group or collective, systemically, you would position in the room on the far left origin, and then past would come next, and then present, future, and then distant future ideally is actually perpendicular. We have this also written in at least in English and Catalan as a step-by-step, but here it's you would accompany also the collectives or communities in answering these questions step-by-step. We would do it if it's with lots of people, having everybody fill in Post-its, and then we do a pattern language approach. So it would be like a wall full of Post-its answering this question, maybe 50, maybe more, and then you find what are the patterns that are emerging in each of these questions. And this is a really excellent tool to establish the narrative of the organization or the community. In Català, it's relat, right? So the story, essentially. And so this, then you continue developing upon that, answering these questions. So finding at least 10 milestones that define your place at a geological level, and then finding at least 10 milestones that define your place biologically, and then 10 milestones that define your place culturally. Right, so those really remarkable moments, either in time or aspects that really make your community distinct, or your place distinct. Yeah. Okay, so any questions before we go into the breakout rooms and share, and then we can do a debrief together afterwards? Yeah, it's great then. Okay, so we're even 2 minutes early. Super. So let's do pairs for 15 minutes. Yeah. Hey, how was it? How was the sharing? Yeah, awesome. Okay, any reflections that anybody would like to share?
Anna Maria here. I had a little bit of a technical issue because I was alone in the breakout room at first, and then I got sent to another room, and then the time was a little bit short with 3 people, of course. But it was a pleasant listening experience.
Okay, well, that's good. Were you able to do the homework though? So you had the experience?
Yes, and I practiced a bit like last time because we had to do this exercise like briefly last time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but then yeah, I have a lot of information also. It was a great exercise for myself. I didn't know that much.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. And anybody else? Thank you very much, Anna Maria, by the way. Anybody else want to share? Any insights or reflections? And especially here. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I I realized that what I was missing in my place is what the other place, the place of Yona, had was like their forte. So I found it very interesting because most likely it's we can learn from each other, or at least I think. Yeah, so that was very interesting.
Oh, that's remarkable. Thank you very much, Sue. Yeah. And did any of you see any things in common, at least at the local personal level, of the geology, the culture, and the biology? Like for example, sometimes some places that are like borders are actually also places of migration of birds, or or has a or sometimes there's the culture that's on a coast or a port that has a culture that's much more intercultural or open. But I don't know if anybody noticed any kinds of patterns like that when they were looking at the milestones, like things in common.
For us, probably here in Mallorca, the most, from what I know, the impacting change was when the the industry shifted from agricultural to tourism in the in the 50s, 60s of the last century, and that affected basically the entire culture and landscape of Mallorca. Because this is when everything got developed, big roads were made, a massive airport was built, houses, resorts, all the internal landscape has been populated with homes. So that's prior to this, there was not such a big impact, I think, in the Mallorcan way of life until then.
Excellent observation, Kevin. Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes just simply the human intervention can really shape a culture, right? As city landscapes do, really. Yeah, good.
There, I think that the shift in industry, like the choice of really like investing energy and money into a different industry was really the decision that made the change more than the natural migration of people.
Yeah, no, for sure. So it was like a political or policy change that shaped the outcome. Good, interesting. Yeah, and also the power of actions like that can totally shift a culture, but at a reverse too. You know, that if we're able to um, intervene and do those political or policy changes, that in maybe even a decade or less, because we can also accelerate those kinds of changes, and we'll find that out when we're doing leverage points. But that is also possible, right? So we're also able to to impact for good, and not just have bad impact. Of course, there's no bad or good, but yeah, great. Okay. Any other reflections before we go to the next one? Next topic. Okay. All right, so I know that quite a number of people were unable, well, I see the faces now that weren't able to come last week, but they're here today. So I'll try not to repeat too much, but I'll do a little bit of a summary of the medicine wheel and the Chicana. Sorry, just a second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Sorry about that. There we go. So last week we talked about a little bit about the medicine wheel, and I went really quite quickly introducing the introduction of the Thanksgiving address. And maybe before I begin, I just wanted to get a sense, and I can stop my share for a second. How many people know of a Thanksgiving address? Maybe it's not this one, but maybe it's a different one. But if you're familiar with Thanksgiving addresses, in Spanish it would be Acción de Gracia. En catalán, Acción de Gracias. ¿Sí? No? Okay. Oh, Zia, maybe? Yeah. Do you want to say where or which one?
Well, I feel like it's been a discussion here, like in the US, 'cause that's where I'm living right now, where I'm from, specifically around Thanksgiving, like around the date in November, because of the history of genocide associated with that day. And so I think that over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of conversations of how to reframe the significance around that date, and specifically surrounding other types of Thanksgiving addresses and other types of groundings. So through that conversation. That's where I've mostly heard of it, but I don't remember the specific ones or names of them, but
no worries.
There's been a lot of them, yeah.
No worries. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, there are a great many, of course, and it's very, very common in Indigenous cultures, and we've had actually the honor of working in different places all around the world, mostly in North and South America and Central America, but also in other continents. And it's and we find it's a really good example of landscape integrity. So a really good example of mapping, understanding, and living the complexity that shapes our landscape, and also as us as part of that landscape. I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, so last week I went into what the medicine wheel was about. Just a second, I'll get a little bit closer so we can see it. And I wanted to approach it a little bit differently. So last week I was kind of just explaining quite literally what the medicine wheel is about, but I'm just going to give you a bit more of context. So this is a shape and a framework, but mostly a shape that you will find in so many places. So I taught a number of years ago, but I taught for a few years in Indigenous communities as a public school teacher, and and mostly with Haudenosaunee communities, with Mohawk communities to be specific, in Southern Ontario, in Canada, and this is how we started every morning. So every morning we gave thanks to all of creation, and we would literally spend maybe even 20 minutes or half an hour of the start of the school day in our Thanksgiving address before any class began. And the reason for this was obviously multiple, but what the elders, because there was always well, always, at least in the schools where I was teaching, there was always an elder of the community who was there as a resource person, and she was there to give guidance and frame all of the material that they were learning from the common Canadian curriculum, because it was a public school, and land it in their culture. And she did that through the medicine wheel, right? So if we were teaching even about calendars or the seasons, she would use this, or mathematics. She would have teachings that she would share with us that we could use and incorporate into our daily lessons, that would be able to link their relationship to land with everything else that they were doing. I'll share another story as well, actually, and this is just actually recently. Last week, we had the pleasure of hosting a webinar which featured John B. Zoe, and I can write his name in the chat. Oops, sorry, I think I just got out of screen share. Sorry about that. John B. Zoe. And I can also put a couple links that he sent me last week in the Slack through Alex. But he's the chief negotiator for the Tlicho agreement, which was a historic agreement that made it so that the Tlicho Dogrib Nation, or Dene Nation, was able to be an autonomous territory within Canada. And so this is a really recent signing. So in 2003, I believe, is when they signed it. And they were able to negotiate the entire structure, which covered economic development, education system, health system, governance in general, with their version of the medicine wheel, right? So it is such a simple yet complex way of not just understanding your relationship to land, but also how to govern, how to organize the economy or economics, and other and social services, etc. What I wanted to share with you, I'm not sure, would it be helpful for me to go through the different elements again? I have an example here, for example. Just a second, I'm going to see the faces. Would it be? Okay, so I can go through that again, because I know there are some people who weren't there. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'll do it a little bit differently. So I set it up today. Well, actually yesterday. Are you able to see that well, or I can also explain? How's the quality? Sorry, because I can't really see my computer at this point. A second. Yeah, it's good? Okay. Let's see if I can get everything there. Okay, so in our house, this is east, okay, right here.
Just maybe 1 second. Is there a possibility to put your window like on the whole screen so we could see that?
Yeah, if you take a look at the bottom there's a place that it's view, and you put a speaker.
At the top right, at the top right of the screen, there's like this gallery view, and you can click on the icon, and it changes from speaker view to gallery view.
Perfect, managed. Yes, thanks.
That's a good question. Okay, so this is a bit of a mix actually between Haudenosaunee and Quechua tradition. So it's a mix of the medicine wheel and the chacana. But this is something that my grandmother would always have, a blanket or something, or she would, even if she didn't have a small little blanket, she would get a big leaf. But whenever we would walk anywhere, and for many years actually she was living with us in a city, she always had the custom, being from obviously from the Andes, to pick things up and put them in her pocket. And I remember always asking her, why do you do that? Why are you picking up that really pretty flower, or, you know, or a coin, or a leaf, or a stone? And she said, it's to give the offering. And so whenever we arrived wherever we had to arrive, you know, and sometimes it was, you know, quite an urban place, but she would give that offering to the land, and give thanks for our safe arrival to our destination. And she taught me that in the East, this is exactly the same, maybe not coincidence, but it is exactly the same actually as Haudenosaunee. So I'm going to also explain when they differ. But in the Haudenosaunee, or Mohawk and Six Nations territory, also in Quechua Chicana, the East represents fire. It represents the sun. And here you often have, and it also represents the sacred medicine. So she would always, if she had coca leaves with her, she would put the coca, she would find 7 coca leaves, and she would place them very, very carefully, like in a sun, like star pattern. Let's see if I can do it with 2 hands, 1 hand, like that. Yeah. And so she would put it down on the east side. I mix this with Haudenosaunee, which has tobacco. So this is pure tobacco here, which has also been blessed. And I mix it here because in Haudenosaunee, this is the place where the tobacco lives. This is the place of beginnings. This is where things are born. This is where spring is represented, but also birth. And also it could represent things that are new. So maybe you're starting a new project or a new phase in life, or maybe your community is going through a phase of initiating something exciting, maybe a community process that could be quite transformative. So all of that energy and all of those symbols are right here. And here's also where infants and children are. This is where we remember our own infancy, even our own childhood, and we give thanks to it. And this is a place where we can also give thanks and honor all the children and babies in our lives and everything that they've taught us and helped us along the way in being who we are and what we're able to offer to our community. Sometimes you can put a little candle or other things of that color of newness. In Haudenosaunee, also it is associated to the color red for fire, right? So they often put something of that color here. And here is also the aspect of intellectual, of intellect. Yeah, it's when the babies are born. That's in Haudenosaunee teachings. They say this is when the mind is born. The spirit is there, but the mind comes into being. This is the awakening of the intellect. I don't know if anybody has questions at this point, so I'm going to kind of keep going up and down here, and then maybe we can keep going around.
Yeah, Erika, you have a few questions on the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go for it then. If just a second, I'll try and pull them up then.
I answered.
Oh, you've answered it. Okay. So the Haudenosaunee, yes. And the, yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Osgoodman. Any other questions at this point, or? I did mention this actually last week as well, but this is a teaching, obviously, that comes from my grandmother and my father, but also comes from a medicine woman from the Six Nations Reserve, very, very humble lady named Janice Longboat, and you will not probably find her on the internet or anything. And she said the most important thing, because at the beginning, even my father and my grandmother and her, they were quite hesitant to share these kinds of teachings and these kinds of knowledges because they had been misappropriated and even and we'll see an example of that actually later. But in recent years, Janice Longboat, but so many other people, and my father as well, they said, no, everybody needs to know. Tell as many people, but remind them always to honor where it comes from, right? Always say like the name of the nation or even the elder that shared those teachings with you, which is why I always say I honor always Janice Longboat for sharing these teachings with me, and also my grandmother, above all, Orfelina Bustamante. Sorry, as a parenthesis. So if we go back here, so we'll see down here we have the south. So in the south you have, actually I don't have it here. This is where the moon is. So I have something white there. It is also where the water is. And sometimes you can have a little dish if you want to have like a more permanent altar or temple. My grandmother would always have a bottle of water, and she would sprinkle water when she would say thank you to the south here and honor the waters. And she would always say thank you also to all the bodies, you know, the lakes, the rivers, the oceans, the rain, the clouds. And here, so we're going from beginnings to adolescence. So here we say thank you also to the youth, and we can also say thank you to our own youth. You know, the youth in our lives, but our own lived youth. Here's also where things start to grow. So we say thank you to summer, but we also say thank you to, you know, all the life in summertime, which is really just, you know, coming into being and starting to perhaps even produce fruit. Here we say thank you to the element, or sorry, not the element, the aspect. So if here it's intellectual, here it would be physical. Sorry, emotional rather. Sorry, physical is here. Emotional. This is where all those feelings are really just at the surface. My grandmother would always joke that this is where passion lives. You know, this is where also music lives. This is where rhythm lives. This is where all those, you know, first time feeling emotions that are just, you know, when you fall in love for the first time, or when all those kind of young relationships, she said, would live here. You know, so here we always honor the medicine as well. So the medicine of Haudenosaunee is cedar, and cedar is there because it is a protection plant that protects youth, because sometimes youth can be a little bit wild, and we do need a little bit of protection and limits and things to comfort us. Cedar is traditionally in the Haudenosaunee teachings is what they would use to cover the floor or to make their beds in the longhouse, and it is something that is a place that can ground you, root you, but also it is a beautiful, tall, pointy tree that is also very connected to the spirits as well. And it connects. There's an axis here from youth directly to the elders, also because of that. I don't know if there's any questions, and if not, I keep going. Yeah. So here we have the West. And in the West, we have, we say thank you to the West, and we say thank you to Mother Earth. But we also say thank you to Earth as an element. And here is where the physical aspect of life resides. It's not earlier. And sometimes there was always questions of why is physical here and not here or here? And it is because this is where really things come into fruition. This is actually really where the big harvest is. This is where the things consolidate, the things come together, and that's why the physical is so important. Janice Longwood, actually, in this respect, she would say that that adulthood is really thanks obviously to this journey of growing up that you've had, but adulthood is really where you're able to contribute in a significant way, in having listened to and lived and being informed of everything else that has preceded, and now here you're really able to land things and make a big difference, right? So here we have the traditional herb of the Haudenosaunee, which would be the sage, right? And here it's we do sage bundles. So this one is from Canada. In fact, and in Peru they also do sage, and this one is actually straight from Peru. So it's a little bit of a different color, but they do this very similar wraps where you would just collect a few sticks of sage and wrap them up. In Peru, they use a lot of red to tie things, always natural fibers. And in Haudenosaunee, they use white thread. And this is, they say it's because of peace. Yeah. And then we have up here in the north, we say thank you to the north as a direction, and we say thank you to elders and ancestors. We say thank you also here to the stars, and we say thank you to the wind and air. This is a place of winter time where things start to rest, start to close, sleep. Maybe this is a period also for deep reflection. This is a really good place to meditate and reflect. And here in the north, in Haudenosaunee territory, the medicine is sweetgrass, which I see is what also Zia was writing in the chat. And so often you would braid sweetgrass just like here. So when it's nice and fresh and green, you would grab a bunch, and in this case, for example, when we do it, we always braid it for an intention. So my intention here for this one was for Thanksgiving use, but you could do it for other reasons, for protection, for telling a story, and you burn it always from the end, right? And that allows us the prayers to go up to the sky as smoke. And then same smelling element exists in Peru, oddly, and it's called Palo Santo. And it is actually what also is here in terms of the herb, the medicinal herb. And then we would go back. So in Peru, it's somewhat different from Haudenosaunee, although Haudenosaunee, they do use the 7 directions, which would be obviously east, south, west, and north. And then you go to the sky direction, the earth direction, and the interior direction. But my also in Quechua, that's really built into the practice of the ceremony, where you would go back to east, and you say thanks once again to the east, where things begin and end and begin once again. And then you say thank you to the north, to the sky. And they would make reference specifically to the sky spirits and the earth spirits, and then your own spirit. And then you say thank you to everyone in your circle as well. So I thank you to you. This is the medicine wheel. I don't know if you have questions. Yeah, thank you. As the Thanksgiving ceremony. So I wanted to suggest a breakout room. Just a second. I'm going to go back to sharing it. So you can see it's more or less mapped out here. With the other class, we also shared, because there's actually the Thanksgiving ceremony address, which is a little bit different because it goes through all the creatures of earth and gives thanks in a circle, saying thanks to the birds and the fish and the flowers and the waters and the fire, etc. So I can put that up on the Google Drive as well, if helpful. But it is it's a bit different, but it's also very, very beautiful in terms of a ceremony. Okay. So what I wanted to suggest at this point, and you can use, they're quite similar. So you could use the medicine wheel, the Chicana, but maybe the medicine wheel might be a little bit more simple. The Chicana has quite a bit more complexity. I was going to ask you 3 questions, and we can put it in the chat as well. Actually, Alex, if you could help me by just writing it out there, and I'll say them right now. So I wanted you in groups of 3, just for about 10 minutes or so, talk with your group but maybe give yourselves a few minutes of silence at the beginning. But I wanted to see where you would position first yourself on the medicine wheel, and if that helps you gain any new insight or information. And then I wanted you to position, if you're involved in a project or an association or a collective or a movement, if you could position them in the medicine wheel and why, and if that gives some information because of that. And then lastly, I wanted you, because this is landscape integrity, but we're doing it in the nested system approach, right? So smaller to bigger, to your land and your community where you live and where your movement lives or your project lives, and where your community would be in the medicine wheel. And why? Are there any questions there about that? No? Okay. So I think maybe we can go into breakout rooms then, and you guys can reflect and share, and then I'll introduce the homework actually right at this point, because it'll make more sense. Super. All right. So how did it go? Anything interesting get observed with that exercise? Any connections made? Or did you have fun at least in your small groups? Yeah, Ana Hermano.
Yeah, maybe I can share. It was interesting. We talked about how one person can also be in many places, depending on the part of one's life, and also the same like group of people can also be the group or the community can also be in many places, and that it's interesting, and where does the different things connect and align, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Good. No, it's really very right on observation, Anna. Yeah, for sure. People can be in in all four, even depending on the context. Absolutely. Good. Anybody else have a similar reflection or different? Julia.
Yeah, nothing. I wanted just to say that was the same in our group. We had like, we were also like going from one phase to the other, watching it really like a process. Yeah.
That's interesting. In fact, Janice Longboat would often talk about the axes, right? So that sometimes it's actually really interesting, almost easier to go from east to west or north to south, you know, in different relationships, then there's sometimes tensions in the other ones, which you can actually think about if you know, if you have brothers or sisters, or if you have a kid. That sometimes it's easier to relate when they're littler than when they're older. so yeah, very true. Any other reflections? Yeah. Oh, we have two. Okay, so Anna and then Kate. Anna Maria.
Yeah, we were actually wondering if, because you said it starts from east and it goes south, west, and then north. We were actually thinking, wondering if it's also possible to go back, like for example, from south to east again.
I think it would depend on the nation. That's a really good question, actually, Anna Maria. When I was, depending on the ceremonies, it actually goes with the flow of the water. Like in some of the communities where we would do like a medicinal ceremony, maybe not necessarily a Thanksgiving ceremony, we would go exactly what you were saying. So counterclockwise, right? It wasn't according to the directions in those ones. It was more like it was a sweat. But yeah, and the difference they said is that they go because that's the way the water flows when it goes down a hole. So yeah, it's a good observation. Yeah, Kate.
It was interesting for me to see myself in relation to my project, to put the two views together, like in relation to the organization and where I'm at. It was interesting to see, like relating maybe as like adult elder to this kind of baby project. It gave me a nice sense of like where I'm at, and also perhaps like holding it in a more realistic context, like not expecting it to be where it isn't yet. I don't know, it was profound. And then we also shared with Joan, and she very beautifully expressed to us that in her medicine wheel work, every quadrant is 13 years. So she's completed one cycle and is returning again. So she's in like a regeneration, and her project is in the same moment. So she was reflecting how beautiful that is, that they're regenerating and like coming together in the same moment, which I thought was really lovely. And it's not like it ends, you just keep going.
Oh, exactly. Wonderful. Yeah, and yeah, for sure. I mean, do you know what nation that those medicine teachings were for the 13 years?
I'm not sure.
Was
she
it
just
Julie?
said she practices the medicine wheel in her house, and she said
Oh, okay.
She said it was 13 years in each quadrant.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah,
I love it. You're always learning. I mean, it's incredible. It's very, very, very rich. And Juliette is asking here, I was wondering if, for example, a whole city or region can go from east to south. Can it be possible to find balance in a more diverse and larger context? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the regenerative spiral in that there's the general pattern, but of course there's like everybody, like in a community, you have diversity. So you're going to have people really, really spread out, but you'll have like a general feeling. So in that general feeling, if you're accompanying it, the community or as part of the community, you can do work that can go through those stages. What Janice would say though is that they do have to go through the stages, which is interesting because sometimes people talk about accelerating change, but then they also talk, and especially with regenerative development work, but really still respecting the phases of life, right? So that you can't leap from a seed to a fruit. Okay. But it's important to you know go through the different phases at least. But yeah, with the whole community, it is absolutely certainly possible.
Yeah, I have kind of a mental order in which like I can imagine communities like not as large as cities to do this, but when I'm thinking of an urban context, then I can kind of get blocked. I'm like, this is.
Yeah, this is so relevant, Judith. Actually, that's an excellent question. Yeah, because it's when we talk about communities, we're talking about scale. Scale is so important actually here. When you're talking about a city, it's actually when we're doing kind of change work or community work, it's actually we have to structure it or conceptualize it as kind of nodes of a network. And each of those nodes is a neighborhood or a community or a collective. And transformation can happen at a large scale when we're all networked in the same movement or process, but the actual experiences do have to come at a scale that is that you can actually do experimentation with, so that you can pilot. There's the risk factor that is really, really important in these kinds of processes, which is when it becomes really big, the risk increases so much more. It's actually exponential. So when you're at a smaller scale doing these kinds of change processes, the interesting thing is that, like, for example, a small rural village or a small urban neighborhood will be more willing to take risks because it doesn't mean so much, right? And so they're willing to test things out and experiment, and if things go wrong, it's okay, right? So if that's happening at a networked level across an urban landscape, that can be pretty radical, you know, in terms of change work, but it has to be like that. It can't be some kind of change that's envisioned at a big scale or change process, because the risk index is too high. Yeah, which is why actually we're like always, in fact, our cooperative, it works exclusively, as much as possible at least, with rural communities, because it's just such an amazing scale as well as environment. Is that me or is that somebody else maybe? Okay, no. To test things out, you know, so you have like the rural context, which is really enriching, but you also have the size that can be really fun to just play, you know, test things out. And if it doesn't work one year, try it differently the next year, and maybe it works out. Yeah, and if it doesn't, that's okay. So you can keep trying.
You have a question.
Oh, I have one more question, then I'm going to actually have to hand it over to Oscar. Sorry about that.
I was wondering if, for example, a whole city or region can go from east to south.
Oh, I already answered that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to now hand it over to Oscar then, because he wanted to talk about an anecdote of Maslow, Graves, and Siska Nation. And then we'll go into the resilience cycle. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Actually, at this point, I just wanted to do a really quick plug on the homework, just so you have it clear, because it's really connected to what we just did. Sorry about that, Oscar. And oops. Can you see the mural? Well, is it a white screen? Because that's what I see. What happened? Es veo el blanc?
Les veo sign in.
Okay. I don't know what happened. anyway, the homework, for some reason, the mural has blocked me out.
I'll share screen.
Yeah, can you share the screen? Great. Yeah, the homework essentially is going to be building upon this network, this framework and medicine wheel concept. But we wanted to do was ask you in preparation for next week, so that when we do the sharing, that will be the assignment that you share. You explore frameworks or medicine wheels, like ancestral, traditional, but also activist frameworks that you might be connected with, and go deep into one of them. Like I know some of you are in communities that are, oh, sorry, Oscar.
Alex, can you let me share, please?
Yeah, so a lot of you are living in places or are from places that have like pretty remarkable ancestral traditions in terms of medicine wheels, or even mandalas, or menhirs or dolmens, whatnot. And so, but also in social movements, ecological movements, there are some pretty beautiful frameworks that people use, like the hand, or other shapes that that try and capture the complexity of life at a landscape level, and harness it, so that we're able to deep dive into systemics, into life complexity, and understand it wholly, you know. So so it's find a local traditional framework. So it could be activist, it could be local, it could be ancestral, it could be traditional. And then really get into it, see how it applies, if it does. And if it doesn't, also that's a nice learning too, to yourself, to your project, to your community. And then in the breakout, have 5 minutes to share. Any questions about that? Okay.
Yeah, Erica, in the chat, you have one question.
Okay. Okay, so could we, certainly I can give you an example, Lemmy. So for example, I know in southern England, there are like rock formations, you know, and people have really studied them, and it is some, it has a lot of symbolism that's related to the calendar of agriculture, but also is really related to how people relate to each other. So it's just, again, it's a kind of like a medicine wheel, trying to understand the, you know, complexity of life in a tangible way. But I understand you're from Kenya. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So like I actually worked for years with a Kenyan colleague, and she for sure, like there was one, yeah, I'm sure there's also frameworks in there. She was from a community where they would use beads, for example, to tell stories. So things like that, like any example that helps you like go deeper a little bit more, like understand in a whole body way how your community works, how the landscape is, and helps you relate to it in a really deep way. Does that help? Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, in Euskadi you can find the laburu, that is also a medicine wheel.
Yeah. For example.
Okay, then we have half an hour to, let's see if we're capable of doing everything. If you go to cultural evolution, that in the outline would be number 21. You see that there's a reference to Maslow, no? To the Maslow pyramid, or hierarchy of needs. As I think we already mentioned, Maslow in the 50s, he developed that model, but at the beginning they didn't really talk much that actually he was based on the Blackfoot nation, that it's the Sitka nation, and that he spent like some months in that community, and he took the information from there. He created the pyramid from that. Did we mention that already or no? We didn't mention that. then, well, he kind of developed the model from the Sitka Nation, and after a while, actually, the Sitka Nation told him, "Is like, but what you did, I mean, you got it from us, but also you did it wrong, because you put that the one in the left, it's Maslow's, right? Like, because you put all the psychological needs, safety needs, belongings, and love, and yeah, I can share the screen. Sorry. You can see psychological needs, safety needs, belongingness and love, esteem needs, need to know, aesthetic needs, self-actualization, and transcendence. And they actually told him that he did two things that were wrong. One is that most of these levels for the Sitka Nation were levels that were below the ground, places that you never should go. It's normally like self-actualization for us, it's the goal where we need to get, and for the Sitka Nations, it's the bottom where you should never go below. And the other one is that he took and he made it completely from an individualistic perspective, and the Sitka Nation. Sorry? And Eurocentric. Yeah, well, not yet. And the Sitka Nation was mentioning that self-actualizations was the important base for community actualization, and then cultural perpetuity, to be able to create regenerative cultures that can actually last a long, long time, many generations. Then also something that is interesting about Sitka Nation, talking about what Maslow shared, was that they said, as I added here, that Sitka Nation people have their own system of developing new knowledge in traditional ways, says Ryan Heavyhead, one of the researchers at Red Cross. It's less focused on categories and more interested in how things come together. But how it was exposed in Western communities was more about the categories, that it's actually sometimes quite confusing and it generates stereotypes. Something that we also wanted to share here that we think pretty interesting is that a spiral dynamics, we talked already about it, a spiral dynamics, that in many ways it's a great model that I'm adding in the chat the reference. It's a great model that in South Africa helped to go through the apartheid. That Don Becks was like a counselor for Nelson Mandela, and he also worked in Palestine. And it's very, very helpful. But also to understand a little bit how colonization works. Graves, that it's the main first author of spiral dynamics in the 50s, was actually colleague with Abraham Maslow, and they worked together. And Abraham Maslow developed the pyramid, and Graves developed the spiral. They're very, very similar. Actually, Graves was a little bit closer to the notion of the Sitka community, because he made this projection of individual to community, okay? And it's a little bit what we were talking in the regenerative spiral. And when you see here, they created like a whole stratification of different colors, and each color is a culture with more complexity, okay? The less complexity and more complexity. One very funny thing about this is that when Graves did this, he said that Native Americans were in the purple paradigm at the very bottom of the stratification of paradigms. And he said that the white Americans were around the green, and some of them going to yellow. Just to expose that they stole the knowledge from Native communities, and then when they developed the knowledge, they thought that the native communities were at the bottom of the spiral, as they were at the very top. Just a point on colonization, and to enter a little bit more in this type of cultural evolution models. Did you understood what I meant? Did I explain myself properly? Yeah or no? Yes? Okay. Anyway, spiral dynamics is a very interesting model to follow, but it's important to filter, because they say some things like that native people are less developed than Western cultures. Up to here. I think at this point you should be able to move more or less comfortable in these levels of evolution, of cultural evolution. Do you? More or less, yeah, are capable of managing it? There's some questions about this before we go to the cycle, the resilience cycle.
I have one question. I don't understand really the difference between red and blue. Seems the same. Like, I would like to have some details, really some details between these parts. Also the orange, like for me, I don't understand really the way that the decision making is going in each of these levels.
The decision making. I don't know if I would get so much into this one. If you guys want, we can go back to the regenerative spiral, that it's the same, but to not get confused in two different models that talk more or less about the same thing. And we actually prefer the regenerative spiral for some, because this one generates a little bit of judgmental situations. If we go up to the first session at the top right, where it's number 5 in the outline. Julie, go ahead. What's the question then here in this one?
Oscar, would you please share the screen?
Okay, I share the screen.
Thanks.
Julia?
Here in the spiral, for me, is clear, quite clear. Then there was difficult for me to understand like the difference between some of them, because the drawing were like really similar, but it's okay.
Okay, okay. Your doubt is specifically in the spiral dynamics model. Okay, but the thing is that I'm not sure if everyone actually read about the spiral dynamics here. Then that's why if we get into it, I don't want to confuse people. Did everyone took a look in spiral dynamics? Probably not. Eh? Yeah, some people did. Well, spiral dynamics, as I'm saying, I don't want to get people confused. But the spiral dynamics talks more about it's quite hierarchical, and it goes from they don't talk about trauma or structural violence or war. They just talk about cultural evolution. And they said that at the beige there's prehistoric people, at the purple there's native people, indigenous people. At the red one you have communists and religions. In the blue one you have fascist. In the orange you have capitalist. That it's curious that you have communist 2 paradigms below capitalist. It's clearly made by American people. In the green you have ecologists. In the yellow there's the more kind of it's equivalent to restoration, more or less. In the turquoise would be reconciliation, and coral would be regeneration. Well, actually, they for the coral, it's a very spiritual perspective. It's different. It talks more or less about the same things, but it's a different perspective and sometimes very Eurocentric.
Can I just add one point here, Oscar?
Yeah.
Is the decolonialization lens, right? So when we're looking at this with a critical, not anti-colonial, but decolonial lens, we're also being quite regenerative, right? So, and there's a real difference because I would consider this framework quite colonial, right? So if we're going to be using it, and the regenerative one, I wouldn't find that actually, but people talk about being colonial or not being colonial, you know, but being decolonial is even more regenerative, right? So I mean, I know we're advancing. This is in a few, like 3 weeks from now, when we talk about the community dynamics and everything. But just to start introducing this language, like if we're able to do this work from like an active, regenerative, transformative, and decolonial perspective, then we're really able to deconstruct also how colonialized we have been, all of us, really. You know, so it is like it's a big task, you know, to also like decolonialize ourselves to be able to do this change work at our communities, you know, and also be aware and put those glasses on always when we look at all of this work. Sorry, Oscar, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and if you look into spiral dynamics in the internet and you look at videos and everything, like there's a whole thing about people being like, I'm at the turquoise level, I'm super evolved, I'm like super cool because my consciousness is amazing, and I can teach you about how to be turquoise because I really know how to do it. Then just be careful with that stuff.
Which is colonist. So, yeah. All right.
Then after this pause of colonization, let's move into the resilience cycle. And this, it's here below, there's Johan Rockstrom video, very interesting, very, we highly recommend anything from Johan Rockstrom, actually the one that proposed the planetary boundaries from a Stockholm Resiliency Center, like a bright person. And he was also one of the persons that were developing the resilience cycle. And the resilience cycle is very interesting because it's systemic, and it's also something that helps us develop theories of change. Okay, then what it helps us, it's again systemic. Then you can put anything, a region, your organization, or yourself into the system, into the model, into the framework. When you start thinking about the resilience cycle, you'll see. Well, let's put an example. Let's start in the rigidity trap. The rigidity trap, it's when it's something that it's a crisis of a system. For example, I'm going to put two examples. One it's the natural, and the other one it's social. When you have a forest that there's like some kind of a climate change that goes more into a dry situation, a dry context, the forests is not capable of like adapting fast enough and gets burned, gets a huge fire. Boom, rigidity trap. That's like collapse of the system, complete collapse of the system. Okay. At social level would be 2008, the speculation bubble collapses a part of the capitalist system. Then what happens after the rigidity trap? Rigidity trap is always, not always, but we'll see at the end, but normally it's a whole collapse of the system. What happens after? After, we have the release phase or the liberation phase. In the case of the forest, what is it that we have in this phase? In this phase, we have a lot of potential. We have an empty space that is full of ashes at the floor. That means it's super fertile with tons of seeds and the whole sun going into it. Then the potential is huge to create anything new. Before, where the forest was there was no potential because the forest was fulfilling the potential already. But now there's tons of potential, but a lot of chaos. There's a lot of disorder. There's a lot of disorder. Before you had a lot of order, now you have a lot of disorder. After the 2008, there was a speculation collapse, and a lot of people just was fired, and there was a lot of companies that they had to close, and there was like a lot of chaos, a lot of disorder, but also a lot of potential. Many people were like, now I'm going to do with my life what I always dreamed, and I'm not going to work anymore for capitalist companies because what I want is to really fulfill myself. Like the potential was huge, but there was a lot of chaos too. After that, after the release chaos kind of situation, some structure comes into place, and it starts threatening things. There's some proposals. In the forest example, there's a new forest proposal where some plants start growing. Some plants were already there. Some others are maybe new just because some seeds fell into the ground and start growing. Then there's not one forest proposal. There's many because there's many seeds growing. It's quite individualistic at this point because each seed just tries to grow and starts to try to make some relations of symbiosis with other plants, but it's very it's just the beginning of creating symbiosis. It maybe one plant is capable of creating a symbiosis with another, but there's things that are just a little bit. It's just starting. In the social example, we have that, for example, we normally put these two examples. There was, at least in Catalonia, we had time banks, you know, those type of banks that you exchange hours instead of money, 1 hour of my work for 1 hour of your work, and consumers co-op, just as you know, people that got together to be able to buy all together agroecological products that were ecological and kilometer zero and all that. No? But the proposals were quite modest at the beginning, like small groups of people getting together and trying to buy things together. The time banks were kind of the same. They were kind of trying to make proposals, 15, 20 people getting together to exchange things. As the reorganization phase evolves, the proposals get stronger and bigger and more capable, more complex, they are much more interconnected. In the forest, some of some of the proposals of the forest are getting more and more symbiosis. Other ones are not capable of creating so much symbiosis because maybe the context is not helping that other proposal, but some of the proposals are strong and start to grow, and then they feel that they actually can propose a whole new forest. But and at the social level, like in what we saw in Catalonia in that time, the time bank was kind of this proposal that was interesting, but it never got more than 20, 30 people. But the consumer scope, we're starting to have like consumer scope everywhere. You would have like, only in our region, we had like 13 consumer scope with 50, 60 people each of them. In 2-3 years, you would have like 500 people consuming from this perspective. But then you find the scarcity trap. And the scarcity trap, it's this trap that it's one of the more clear examples of the scarcity trap. It's a rural town in the top of the mountains where the youth goes to the city, and the younger person is 50 years old. And you know that no one is going to go to that town. Then in 10 years, the youngest person is going to be 60 years old. And that in 20 years, that town is going to be dead. This is like the rigidity trap. It's something that happens in once, like it's a collapse. It's like a huge crisis that happens like that. And a scarcity trap, it's a crisis that progressively dies. You know? And in the forest case, is this some of the proposal of the forest are not capable of making it because they're not capable of sustaining this proposal, because the context of dryness that created the fire at the beginning, it's very hard, and the proposal is not capable of developing anymore. But some of the proposals are, and those are the ones that are capable of going through the scarcity trap and creating a strong proposal that goes, and it's capable of going to the growth phase and start to create a whole forest. In the case of the social example, the time bank couldn't make it, and the consumer co-op couldn't make it almost either, because there was a moment that the supermarkets started selling agroecological products everywhere, and the people stopped buying in the consumer co-op and started just buying in the supermarkets, even though it was not very coherent, but it was easier. You know, it was just easier, and you didn't have to go to meetings and everything. You could just go to the supermarket, buy it, and go home. And then some of the consumer co-op just disappeared, and they were like, "What are we going to do now? Like, what the supermarkets is just copying our ideas, and you know, it's like." And then because the structure, the interconnectors, and the complexity of this proposal was strong enough, they said like, okay, then we're going to do a cooperative supermarket. And they started to create cooperative supermarkets in different places in Europe, in different places. And now there's like huge cooperative supermarkets, and many of them are start growing. And some of them have thousands of consumers. Then they clearly were capable of go through the scarcity trap and grow into the growth phase. And in the growth phase means that the consumer scope, it's already a reality. It's a clear, consolidated proposal that it's going to keep growing until it creates until in the conservation phase could become one of the main ways of consuming in our society, where actually almost every town could have a cooperative supermarket. And in the ecological example, it's the same, that it's the forest, that just that proposal of the forest become a huge mature forest. But, and what happens then? What if the context changes? In this moment, the proposal is not so creative, it's very consolidated, and maybe it's not resilient enough, and maybe it's not capable of adapting so well as in the reorganization phase or in the growth phase, because it's a lot of people and it's becoming a little bit rigid. And if there's like a contextual change that change in a subtle way, abrupt way, then the forest could break down again, go into a fire or anything else, or a sickness or a plague or something. And the consumer co-op proposal could also fall into collapse, because it's not capable of readapting. And then collapse again, and then readaptation, and start the cycle again, right? And it's just, and this is how you keep adapting and adapting to the crises that are coming. But that's not really cool, right? Because you create a whole thing and you put so much effort and blah, 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 and then boom, collapse and everything destroys, and it's kind of sad. But there's some people that thought that there's two ways of living the crisis. The dramatic crisis, that it's, no, I don't want to change, I don't want to change, I don't want to change. And then the crisis, it's very strong and very brittle, because you try to hold yourself until there's no more time and it just going to collapse. Or the creative crisis. And it's like, if you're aware that a crisis is coming, what you can do is to wait for it, like try to find out what is it going on, and understand that crisis as a learning process that is helping you to adapt to a new cycle of evolution. Then understand all these problems and restrictions that we find in the way as ¿cómo se digo? No escalons, pero escalons. The different levels for us to be able to evolve. You know what I mean? Then this is a very interesting model because we can apply it now that we're in the landscape in integrity, to understand how is the situation of our ecosystem, but at the same time, how this is related to our community. Is there questions about this model?
So I understand that you're saying change is inevitable. You cannot avoid change, but
No.
you can serve with the change and adapt yourself.
Yes.
Of course, when you're talking about what you said, like about the project, I don't know, you put like a lot of money, a lot of time or whatever, or emotional connection to a project, this can be very difficult to see on time. But I understand that it's also hopeful what you said, no? That there is still hope in the sense of like, well, maybe it transforms, no? So the plant dies and goes to the ground, but becomes compost and then it becomes another plant, no? In this sense, but this can be sometimes difficult to accept.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two things in what you said. Is like, yeah, change it's not nothing you can control. Like the only constant in the universe is change. The only thing that it's constant and it's never gonna change, it's that change is everywhere. And the in the second one that you were mentioning is that yes, now we're in a moment of a systemic crisis. If you look at the the graphic that says panarchy, you see that there's the same infinite sign at different levels: individual, organizational, communitarian, and societal level, right? And these things normally are not happening at the same time. You can be in a growth phase in one, you can be in the crisis in another one, you can be, they're normally not aligned. But right now we're living a systemic crisis. And what that means is that it's a crisis that goes through the whole system. And it goes, we have a crisis at personal level, organizational level, community level, and planet level, all at the same time, and for the same reason. That's a systemic crisis, that it's making us go all in the same spot. And that's it's very important in two ways. One, it's that this could be a huge collapse at every single level of the whole society, or the best opportunity that we ever had to be able to evolve to a different level. It's happening at the same time. And from the regenerative perspective, what's going to happen, it's what it's going to be defined for which is the paradigm that we are capable of sustain. If we are in a lower paradigm, collapse. If we're capable of sustaining a higher paradigm where we actually collaborate with each other, the huge opportunity where we actually can change many, many things. And they're both there, both possibilities. It's the Schrodinger cat. They're both in our destiny. They're both happening at the same time. It just depends on us where we position ourselves. Is there another question about that? Or comment or doubt?
Yeah, I'd like to comment that everything is pretty complex. I got lost quite a few times in your explanation and trying to understand the graphic, but I think at the end I understand where you're getting at. It's to understand a bigger picture. So yeah, it would be good to come to, okay, this is the complexity of things, but in a nutshell, this is what we need to really understand to be able to carry on with our work, our evolution, and how we can participate in our community regeneration or building or whatever, without cluttering too much with some very complex things to digest and understand. But
Yeah.
I understand this is what you need to, we need to go through this phase, but it's hard to.
Yes, yes, I think the two things that are very important in this model are, one, to realize that if this is a collapse or an opportunity, it's up to us. We are deciding, and it depends on if we're capable of being hopeful and optimistic about it, or if we're going to be depressed and pessimistic about it. If we're depressed and pessimistic, we're going to create the collapse. If we're hopeful and optimistic and we're capable of change and manage change, we're going to create the opportunity. It depends on how we position ourselves. It's paradoxical. And the second one is that if we're capable of start like the frame, like what Erica was sharing in the medicine in will and the Chacana, it's not a graphic or anything. It's not, it's the way that indigenous people organized their brain. The indigenous people brains are organized in a medicine wheel way. Their whole brain is a medicine wheel, and they organize their thoughts like a medicine wheel, and they organize their stories, their knowledge, everything around the medicine wheel, and they make that thinking this way are capable of creating permanent cultures, right? Then, if we are capable of start using systemic frameworks to organize our brains and think, and when we think about change, we can think about where are we now in the reorganization phase? Are we facing a scarcity trap? Are we facing a rigidity trap? Oh, am I dealing with this like from a dramatic perspective or creative? Am I resisting to change or I'm surfing it? Like, and we start like being able to put these models in our head when change come, when crisis come, we're capable of like adapt to it and really face it from a different perspective and take it from a creative focus. But we're going to do more of a resilient cycle in community. But I think it's important to maybe to start here because I think it really starts with the land. But then in the community, we're going to work a little bit more with it. Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about it would be really cool maybe in the Slack to also like hear about other folks, like the way that like I've been thinking a lot about how we've been trying to think through some of these issues within the, like in the US within the defund the police campaign that we're running, like to try to get rid of the policing system that we have, and how we're trying to like think of how we can organize like a generative campaign within the construct of also like austerity measures that are going to be taking place after or during as a result of like the big global pandemic that we have. It'd be really cool. Maybe in like the Slack, we can share like other ideas or other ways people have also been thinking about that to sort of like, yeah, avoid some of the traps I think that get set up for us, like also within movement spaces, because of like some of that spiral. So I was just thinking about that, and it would be really cool to share and hear like what other ideas folks are sort of throwing out there right
Cool,
now.
yeah, thank you. Well, guys, if is it clear? Then there's the proposal exercise that Erica did, and yeah, I mean, have fun doing a little bit of archaeology and finding some lost frameworks in your place, and try to make them yours, and to be able to start thinking with them. And see you next week. Yes. Cool.
Yes. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Nice week.
Have a
Thank
good
you all.
week.